Laura stood at the window of her cramped apartment, staring at the endless rows of cars stuck in Lagos traffic. The humid air clung to her skin, making the room feel smaller than it was. She sighed and dropped her gaze to her reflection in the glass. Her hair, plaited in neat but tired cornrows, seemed to dull her otherwise striking features. It was like wearing a mask of mediocrity. "Look at you, just wasting away," Titi's voice echoed in her mind. "You think any of those men at work notice you with that look?" It wasn't that Laura didn't care about her appearance. She did. But working as a cashier at the bank left her with just enough to pay rent and keep the lights on. There wasn't room in her budget for beauty treatments, imported clothes, or the Brazilian hair that seemed to be every woman's crown these days. Titi, her best friend since university, was always pushing her to change that. "Stop acting like you're poor," Titi had said last week when they met for drinks. Titi, with her flawless face and immaculate weave that cascaded down her back, was the kind of girl men couldn't ignore. She was also the kind of girl who never worked a day in her life. Laura knew she needed to make a change. Titi wasn't wrong about one thing: in Lagos, appearances were everything. At work, at social events, even when walking down the street, beauty opened doors. But what could she do? Her salary was barely enough to get by, and the kind of hair Titi wore, luxurious, imported, silky, was out of her reach. That was, until this week. After months of careful saving, she finally had enough. It was reckless, maybe even irresponsible, but Laura was done being invisible. She wanted to walk into the bank tomorrow with heads turning, people noticing her for once. Her phone buzzed with a message from Titi, *, "Have you bought it yet? Don't let these small girls keep collecting attention. Be bold, my friend, *. Laura laughed softly, shaking her head. Bold was the word Titi always used when she needed convincing. Taking a deep breath, Laura tapped on the link Titi had sent her a few days earlier. It was an address for a high-end beauty store in Victoria Island, a place that sold the finest imported hair in Lagos. She hesitated for only a moment before grabbing her purse and heading out the door. The store was tucked into a quiet street off the main road, its exterior gleaming like a hidden jewel. As Laura stepped inside, the air-conditioned coolness washed over her, a stark contrast to the sweltering heat outside. Shelves lined with shimmering bundles of hair surrounded her, each one more perfect than the last. Brazilian, Peruvian, Indian, so many choices. It was like standing in a dream. Behind the counter, a tall, elegant woman smiled at her. She had the kind of beauty that made Laura's insecurities bubble to the surface. Her skin was flawless, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You're looking for something special, aren't you?" the woman asked in a voice as smooth as honey. Laura nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. The woman stepped from behind the counter and gestured toward a display case at the far end of the store. "Come. I have something just for you." As they walked, Laura couldn't shake the strange feeling in the pit of her stomach. The store, though beautiful, had an air of quiet that made her uneasy, as if the walls themselves were watching. The woman opened the display case with slow, deliberate movements, and inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was the most stunning bundle of hair Laura had ever seen. It shimmered under the soft lights, black and sleek with just the right amount of bounce. She reached out to touch it, and as her fingers brushed the strands, a chill ran up her arm. It was unnaturally cold, like ice. The woman's smile widened. "This is our finest piece. Imported directly from India. Perfect for someone like you. How much is it?" Laura asked, already bracing herself for the answer. 45,000, the woman replied without hesitation. Lara's heart skipped a beat. That was nearly her entire savings. But something about the way the hair felt in her hand, so smooth, so alive, made her decision before she could stop herself. "I'll take it," she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. The woman's eyes gleamed with something Lara couldn't quite place, and for a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. But it was too late. The transaction was made. Back at home, Lara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, holding the weave up to her head. Tomorrow, she would have it installed at the salon. For now, she admired the way it caught the light, how it seemed to glow with its own energy. As she put it down on the counter, she noticed something odd. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing colder. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as fatigue. It had been a long day, after all. Lara crawled into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her mind racing with excitement about the new life she was about to step into. She couldn't wait for the attention, the admiration, the envy. But as she drifted off to sleep, she failed to notice the faint, almost imperceptible whispering that filled the room. A voice, low and distant, carried on the cold air.
"It's mine."
The morning sun sliced through the thin curtains in Lara's apartment, pulling her from a restless sleep. She stretched, a strange sense of anticipation tingling in her veins. Today was the day. She glanced at the bundle of hair on the counter, its inky black strands gleaming like midnight. It looked even more luxurious in the light of day. At the salon, Lara was greeted with the familiar hum of hairdryers and the chatter of women discussing their weekend plans. She felt a rush of excitement as the stylist, a slender woman named Ngozi, gestured for her to sit in the chair. "You're going to look amazing, girl," Ngozi said as she began prepping Lara's hair. "This weave is top quality. I haven't seen one this nice in a while." Lara smiled, watching in the mirror as Ngozi worked with skillful hands, braiding her cornrows tightly to her scalp before sewing the weave into place. As the hours passed, Lara's reflection began to change. The tired woman she had seen every day for the past few months was gone, replaced by someone radiant, someone almost unrecognizable. The weave was perfect. It fell in soft, cascading waves down her back, framing her face in a way that made her features look sharper, more defined. She felt like a different person, like the version of herself she had always wanted to be. When Ngozi finished, she stepped back and admired her work. "Look at you, Lara. You're going to turn heads." Lara grinned, staring at her reflection. For the first time in a long time, she felt powerful. That night, she went out with Titi to celebrate. They hit one of the hottest lounges on the island, the kind of place where the rich and famous went to see and be seen. As soon as Lara walked in, she felt eyes on her. Men who had never given her a second glance were suddenly taking notice, their gazes lingering a little too long. Even the women, always quick to assess competition, couldn't help but throw envious glances her way. Titi beamed at her. "I told you, girl. Just look at you. You're killing it." Lara couldn't stop smiling. The compliments, the attention, it was everything she had dreamed of. She felt invincible. And yet, beneath the surface of her confidence, there was a nagging sensation, a prickling at the back of her mind. Something wasn't quite right. Throughout the night, she couldn't shake the odd feeling that had been building since she had the weave installed. Every time she touched her hair, it felt cold, as though it had absorbed some of the chill from the air-conditioned room and refused to warm up. And then there was the strange sense that she was being watched, even when no one was looking directly at her. By the time she got home, the excitement of the evening had worn off, replaced by a creeping unease. As she undressed and got ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked amazing, there was no denying that. But as she stared at herself, a chill swept over her, the same coldness she had felt in the store when she first touched the hair. She blinked, and for a split second, her reflection seemed wrong. Her eyes, usually bright and alert, looked dull, almost vacant. And there was something about the way her mouth was set, a slight twist to the corners that made her look less like herself and more like a stranger. Laura took a step back from the mirror, shaking her head. "It's just nerves," she muttered, trying to convince herself that it was all in her imagination. She had been under a lot of stress lately, saving for the weave, working long hours at the bank. It made sense that she was feeling a little off. But as she lay in bed, the unease persisted. The room was unusually quiet, the familiar sounds of the bustling Lagos streets outside seeming distant, muted. And then it came again, the faint whispering she had heard the night before, so soft that she could barely make out the words.
It's mine.
Laura shot up in bed, her heart pounding. She looked around the room, but there was no one there. The only sound was the ticking of her bedside clock, the seconds passing too slowly. She touched her scalp, running her fingers through the weave. The hair was cold, colder than it should be. A shiver ran down her spine. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but the whispers, they felt too real. Desperate for sleep, Laura pulled the blanket tighter around herself and forced her eyes shut. But even as she drifted off into an uneasy sleep, the voice lingered in the back of her mind. The next few days passed in a blur. Laura's new look was a hit at the bank. Her co-workers, who had always treated her with indifference, now complimented her appearance at every turn. The men were particularly generous with their praise, their eyes lingering a little too long whenever she passed by. Laura basked in the attention, but the sense of unease only grew. Each night, the whispering returned. Each night, the woman's voice grew louder, more insistent.
Ha ha ha, bring my hair back.
Laura would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The coldness in her hair was impossible to ignore now. No matter how many times she washed or styled it, the chill remained, as though the hair itself was draining the warmth from her body. By the end of the week, Laura was on edge. She hadn't had a decent night's sleep in days, and her once flawless appearance was starting to falter. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her skin looked dull. She began avoiding mirrors, unable to shake the feeling that her reflection wasn't quite right. One evening, after another restless night, she decided to confide in Titi. "I don't know what's happening," Laura said, her voice trembling. "Ever since I got this weave, things have been strange." Titi raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Laura hesitated, not sure how to explain it. "I keep hearing things, like whispers. And my reflection, sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm looking at myself." Titi waved a hand dismissively. "Girl, you're overthinking this. It's probably just the stress. You've been working too hard. Besides, you look amazing. Everyone is talking about how good you look." Laura wanted to believe her, but deep down, she knew it was more than just stress. That night, the whispers came again, louder this time. The woman's voice was clear, filled with anger and pain.
It's mine.
Laura shot out of bed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. This time, she couldn't ignore it. Something was terribly wrong. She had to find out where this hair came from. And she had to do it soon. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the hair was alive, that something far darker than vanity had taken root in her life. She spent the next day at work in a daze, unable to focus on anything but the chill in her scalp and the whispering voice that seemed to grow louder with each passing night. By now, it wasn't just in her dreams, it lingered in her mind, faint but persistent. "It's mine. Return it." Her coworkers began to notice. "Lara, you okay?" one of her colleagues, Connor, asked. His eyes scanned her face, his concern evident. "Yeah, just tired," Lara mumbled, forcing a smile. "I didn't sleep well." Connor nodded, though his eyes lingered a little longer than necessary on her, the same way everyone's gaze had been drawn to her since she had the weave installed. It was admiration at first, but now, even his look was mixed with something like unease. By the time the workday ended, Lara had made a decision. She needed to know where this hair had come from. She needed answers. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Titi's contact. "Titi, I need to know where you got the link for that hair," Lara texted. The response was almost immediate. "Why? Are you having second thoughts? You look amazing." Lara bit her lip, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. She didn't want to sound crazy, but the truth was clawing its way out of her. "I think there's something wrong with it," she typed. "I can't sleep, and I keep hearing things." Titi's reply was slower this time. "Hearing things? What kind of things?" "Whispers," Lara typed. "Like someone is trying to talk to me. I don't know. It sounds crazy, but I feel like I need to know more about where the hair came from." There was a long pause before Titi finally responded. "The store is legit, Lara. But if you're really that freaked out, maybe you should talk to the owner. She's the one who sells the hair. Her name is Madam Adeshawa." The name sent a shiver down Lara's spine. The tall, elegant woman from the store with her piercing eyes and too smooth voice. There had been something about her that didn't sit right with Lara from the moment she stepped into the shop. Lara stared at the message, her gut telling her that going back to the store was a mistake. But what choice did she have? The whispers were getting louder, the cold in her scalp deeper. She had to find out what was happening to her, even if it meant confronting Madam Adeshawa. The next day, Lara found herself standing in front of the store again. It looked different this time, darker, more imposing, as though the shadows clung to its edges. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. A wave of nausea washed over her, and for a moment, she considered turning back. But the whispers wouldn't let her. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The interior of the store was just as she remembered, clean, bright, and filled with the scent of expensive perfumes. But there was something off. The air felt heavier, as though it carried a weight she couldn't see. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up.
Please watch out for part 2. Also like and subscribe.